next presenter. Please, Yannick Nimitz is going to talk about corporate decarbonization, understanding CO2 emissions drivers, and CO2 efficiency across high and low pollution firms. Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you very much. Can you see the screen online? Thank you very much for this possibility today to present my current paper, Corporate Decarbonization, Understanding Emission Drivers of High and Low Polluting Firms. The paper is co-authored by my supervisor, Virgili, and as the title already tells you, it is about the emission profiles of high and low polluting firms. So why do we look at emissions? Well, we all know that due to the rise of greenhouse gases, we also see a rise in temperatures. So to fight climate change and to stop climate change, we have to look at emissions. Why do we look at corporations? Well, just some weeks ago, Shell won an appeal in a court in the Netherlands, and in that court it was stated that Shell does not have to reduce their emissions by a specified percentage. But it was also remarked by the judge that Shell does have a historic responsibility for climate change. So we also see that most companies are not on track for their 2050 net zero emission goals. So we have a clear interest in looking at corporations. Why do we want to look to high and low polluting firms? Some years ago there was a study by Virgili who found that more than 70% of global emissions from the past could be traced back to just 100 companies. So we see that there's a big disparity between the majority and the few. When we look at the literature, we know that there have been many macro-level studies about innovations and emissions that normally show an emission reduction effect. We also see that there's already a growing interest in the private sector that finds similar effects. But still gaps remain. Most of these firms were looking at average effects. So what we do is that we apply quantile regressions to answer the question if high and low polluting firms show different patterns in their corporate environmental performance. And to answer that question, we will look at intangible assets, environmental innovation, regulation in the country of headquarters, and the GDP per capita in the country of headquarters. Intangible assets mirror firms' innovative achievements of the past and their innovative capacity. They can enhance corporate environmental performance. Furthermore, they also show the brand value, which can be influenced by corporate social responsibility activities, which have been shown by Kudlak or Hakenetim, that they are especially improving corporate environmental performance from high polluting firms. So we expect that intangible assets are associated with a better corporate environmental performance, and that this effect is stronger for higher polluting firms. When we look at environmental innovation, we know the natural resource-based view that firms can achieve sustained competitive advantages through environmental innovation, and we have seen on country level that eco-innovation does improve the environmental performance of the country. We also see that there are similar results on the firm level for eco-innovation or R&D. But, for example, Wang and others showed for Japanese firms, or Algeta and others for London Stock Exchange-based firms, that these, when they split their samples, that we see differences in the intensity and in the effects. So we expect that environmental innovation is also associated with better corporate environmental performance, and that this effect is stronger for high polluting firms. When we talk about regulation, we know that regulation can trigger environmental innovation and also environmental strategies of firms. We also, I want to mention a study from Ben David and others who showed that a stronger regulation in the country of headquarters leads to a net decrease of emissions of those affected firms. But especially multinationals may also some emission intensive activities. Also, what I want to mention is that low polluting firms may not react to a regulatory push because they may already comply with the regulation. So we expect that this effect of regulation is also associated with better environmental performance of firms, and also that this effect is more pronounced for higher polluting firms. Lastly, I want to mention the environmental Kuznets curve, which describes an inverted U-shaped relationship between GDP per capita and environmental degradation. It's mostly explained by the shift from a polluting industrial economy to a cleaner service-based economy, where also we have this effect that with growing income, the demand for better environmental quality outweighs pollution effects of increased consumption. So due to the construction of the data set, as we have mostly firms from high income countries, we expect that GDP per capita is also associated with better environmental performance, and that this effect is more pronounced for the higher polluting firms due to this social demand that will be more pronounced for high polluters. The database. So we took firm level data from the Refinitiv ICON database, and then we attached their data on the country level from the World Bank, and we did this based on the country of headquarters. And then what we got is an unbalanced panel of almost 1,200 firms from 37 countries with around 7,500 observations. Our dependent variable of interest is corporate environmental performance, and we measure this in absolute CO2 emissions, but also in CO2 intensity, which is the absolute emissions divided by total assets, which then helps us to better identify trends in decarbonization effects, as absolute emissions are often mainly due to the size of the firm. As explanatory variables, we have intangible assets from the balance sheet, the environmental innovation score, air pollution in the country of headquarters as an inverse measure of regulation. I will later come back to that point and explain a little bit more that variable, and GDP per capita, as well as some control variables, some firm characteristics, firm governance characteristics, and country characteristics. Here you have some summary statistics. We also did some Kolmogorov-Smirnov test to test for non-normality of our dependent variable, which confirmed that they're non-normal, so quantile regressions may reveal additional insights. And what I want to mention here is also that you can see here, when we look at the CO2 intensity growth, we see that the average shows that the CO2 intensity is getting worse, so that the firms on average are less efficient in managing the CO2 emissions. But that the median, meaning that more than half of the sample is actually improving their intensity. So again, this is an indication that quantile regressions may reveal additional insights, and so we applied this bootstrap quantile regression model. In the first equation, we look at CO2 emissions and CO2 intensity, which is corporate environmental performance. And then we explain it by our explanatory variables, the set of the vector of control variables, sector effects, and time effects. And then in the second equation, what we did is that we subtracted the last year's environmental performance from both sides of the equation, and this gives us the option to look at the growth of CO2 emissions and the growth of CO2 intensity to see if we have predictors for this growth. All our variables, explanatory variables and control variables, are lagged by 1 year. So let's come to the results. First of all, I will explain a little bit these graphs. So what we see here, is the quantile regression for CO2 emissions, so for first dependent variable. This graph, always the interpretation is the same. On the left, we have the low quantiles. These are the firms that show that are low polluters, while the ones on the right, we have the firms that are high polluters. Okay, and then the red line is zero line, and as we are measuring CO2 emissions, everything that is above that line leads to an increase of emissions, is associated with more emissions, meaning worse environmental performance. Everything that is under this line is improving environmental performance by reducing emissions, by reducing emission intensity, or by reducing emissions growth. So what we see is that intangible assets show a negative association with emissions, and we also see a little bit that this trend is getting a little bit stronger when we look at higher polluting firms. What we see for environmental innovation is a different thing. So we see that environmental innovation is associated with more emissions for most quantiles except the 90% quantile. A possible explanation for this may be that the environmental innovation might improve the firm's efficiency, but it may have also the effect that due to the innovation the firm has more economic activity and the firm might be growing, which then leads or is therefore associated with more emissions. Now when we look at air pollution, I said that I want to speak about that variable a little bit. Air pollution is measured as the percentage of population that is exposed to air pollution that is exceeding World Health Organization targets. So it's a score from 0% to 100%. So the higher the air pollution, the more people are having bad air quality. And what we assume is that the more air pollution, the less regulation we have. And therefore the less air pollution, the more regulation we have in the country. So what we see here is that the more air pollution, meaning the less regulation we have, the more emissions have firms in the country. So what we see is basically that the absence of strong regulation is associated with worse environmental performance. Then for GDP per capita, we see a downwards trend, and we see that GDP per capita is associated with better environmental performance. We see also this reversing trend here at the end. This may be indicating that those firms at the upper end of the distribution that have the most emissions are not really able to decrease their emissions due to the societal pressure they may get. Now we look at CO2 intensity. What we see is intangible assets again are associated with a lower CO2 intensity, meaning that it's associated with a better corporate environmental performance. We see for environmental innovation, we see a little bit what I mentioned before. So what we can see here is that for the upper quantiles, environmental innovation is improving the CO2 intensity of higher polluting firms. So basically, what I mentioned before, we see that environmental innovation leads to more economic activity, or may lead to more economic activity, but it's also helping those firms that show a bad environmental performance to reduce their emission intensity, to be more efficient with their emissions. Air pollution shows not in all quantiles a significant effect, but it shows in some quantiles a significant effect. Again, the absence of strong regulation is associated with worse environmental performance. And for GDP per capita, we see that this societal pressure, or this GDP per capita, is associated with better environmental performance, and that this pressure is increasing for higher polluting firms. Now we're looking at the growth of emissions. So in this case, we look at emissions growth, CO2 growth. First of all, what we see is that intangible assets and environmental innovation are not significant across the quantiles, meaning that they do not have a year-over-year effect on the CO2 growth of firms. What we see for air pollution is that for the lower quantiles, we see that it again is associated with an increase of CO2 growth. In this interpretation, the firms in the lower quantiles are those firms that are improving their CO2 growth, meaning they're reducing emissions. So what we see here is that if there's an absence of strong environmental regulation, that this decarbonization of corporations is slowed down. And GDP per capita, we can see that there is a clear downwards trend again across quantiles, meaning that those firms in richer countries face increased pressure to improve their emissions, especially when they are worsening their environmental performance. Now we look at the CO2 intensity growth. Again, what we see in tangible assets is for most, and environmental innovation are for most quantiles not statistically significant, But what we can see is that for the highest polluting firms, we see that there is an intensity growth reducing effect. So what we see is that for those firms that are worsening their environmental performance most, intangible assets and environmental innovation are able to mitigate this worsening trend. Air pollution shows pretty similar results to CO2 growth. Again, we see absence of regulation is associated with less decarbonization of firms. And now for GDP per capita, what we can see is that it's insignificant for the lower quantiles, but gets significant and increasingly stronger effect for the upper quantiles. When you think about it, it does make sense, because as I said before, GDP per capita somehow also channels the demand for a better environment, and the firms on the left of the graph are the firms that are improving their environmental performance. So there's no need for the society to somehow pressure these firms to further improve it. But the further we go to the right, the worse is the environmental performance of these firms. So it's kind of intuitive that these firms are experiencing stronger pressure from the society to improve their environmental performance. After we saw these results for intangible assets and environmental innovation, we thought, okay, maybe a reason why we do not see an effect, or not a clear effect, is because these variables need more than 1 year to have an effect on intensity growth or CO2 growth. So what we did is that we lagged the variables up to 5 years. So on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is indicating the 5 different lags. And then on the left you have the CO2 emissions growth, and on the right you have the CO2 intensity growth. So what we see is actually that intangible assets for the higher quantiles does have some small effects, same as environmental innovation in longer lags. But what's more interesting is that if we look at CO2 intensity growth, that we see a long-lasting intensity growth reducing effect of this for the high polluting firms. When we look at air pollution, we again see that the absence of regulation does slow down the decarbonization of firms, and this is a very long-lasting effect, so it's a call for stronger regulation for firms. And lastly, when we look at GDP per capita, especially in intensity growth, we see that there's also quite a long-lasting effect on the intensity growth for the higher quantiles, but it's not as long-lasting as, for example, intangible assets. So to conclude, we saw that intangible assets and environmental innovation do improve corporate environmental performance, especially with stronger effects for higher polluting firms. However, what we also saw is that environmental innovation may drive absolute CO2 emissions through more economic activity. What we saw is weak regulation slows down corporate decarbonization, and GDP per capita positively influences corporate environmental performance. Especially high polluting firms respond strong to GDP per capita, to that variable, which we explain somehow by the societal pressure from wealthier countries. So some policy implications of that is that I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I want to stress the importance of environmental regulation for any decarbonization effort. So it is associated with the absence of regulation leads to higher emissions, and especially for firms that are theoretically improving, it is slowing down their decarbonization. Also, we saw, as due to the differences between high and low polluting firms, that a more tailored regulation is necessary, and an option would be to subsidize environmental innovative activities, and especially in emission intensive industries, because we saw that for those firms environmental innovation does improve their emission intensity. And lastly, another option could be to fund basic research for those industries and promote the knowledge transfer to have a faster transmission to reduce emissions and emission intensity. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to hear any questions or comments from Josep Maria or from the audience.
Thank you, Yannick. After this discussion, Josep Maria, thank you.
at the first slide, so it was very easy to get a nice idea about the contents of the paper and the importance of the topic we were discussing there. Well, my comments are mainly about the written version of the paper, not the presentation that I like very, very much. Well, about some suggestions. First suggestion, to discuss whether your results may apply to other, let's say, kind of firms, countries, time periods, in order to get, let's say, generalized conclusions. Second point, I was a little bit, let's say, skeptic about the composition of countries in your dataset, because you have very heterogeneous countries. So whether this composition in terms of, let's say, very different development levels, income levels, industry structures could have a bias on your results. And then also having in mind this very heterogeneous composition of papers, whether your policy measures can be applied equally to all these very different countries. So because you have, especially you have institutional context which have nothing to do with each other, so we are very, very heterogeneous. And also the role of national regulation, because you were talking about that in your presentation, that even if you have a firm could face very strong regulation at home, they may outsource the building activities abroad, and then in order to avoid this stronger regulation. So which is the role played by these differences in regulation pressures in terms of emissions, in terms of pollution. And also to better, let's say, sell the content. I'm talking about the quality of the paper, but about the way in which you sell, whether this paper is publishable and where. So in terms of originality, so I think it's very original, but my suggestion is to emphasize that, to highlight that, and also to highlight specifically the contributions of the paper. Then about the conclusion, so you have, sorry, about the hypothesis. You have 8 hypotheses. I think it's too much. Even if you have, then you change numbers, so you have up to 4 and then 5A, 5B, something like that. I am not saying that one idea, one paper, so one hypothesis per paper, but perhaps you may, let's say, put aside some of them. And it's just a suggestion, so I think it's quite dense, and you have to check too many things. I would prefer, let's say, a more simplified version, even if that implies to skip the paper into different ones. And then I also would suggest to check whether results are different across quantiles, so whether you have, so to calculate interquantile regressions, in order to check whether, let's say, the coefficient in the 50 quartile is statistically different from the coefficient in the 75 quantile. And this is perhaps something that I don't like at all, but it's something very personal. But I would suggest not this kind of dumping style when writing, because you put a statement and then you put a very long list of references, and at the end you don't know whether all of these references are saying the same or not, or whether they are, let's say, so which is the contribution of each one of them. And this is also because you have a lot of a very long list of references at the end, which is quite long. Additional comments. In the concluding remarks, you say that one significant limitation is the absence of companies from low-income countries in the sample. This lack of representation restricts the ability to identify potentially important patterns related to the environmental performance of firms across different economic contexts. But you have some countries with very, let's say, as I said before, very different, very heterogeneous GDP per capita level. You have Chile, Colombia, Malaysia, South Africa. I'm not sure whether you cannot identify, perhaps not Chile, but Colombia as middle low income country. So at the end it's about the classification in your carry out. So that I would say that you don't have, let's say, low-income countries. Yeah. Then you say our results for leverage are contrary to most previous research. When you find something like that, you have to explain, to give some context. Because if your results is different to your expectations, to what most of the empirical literature say, then okay, try to explain why. Why? Because a different data set, different period, different industries, different countries, whatever. But in any case, so you have to provide, let's say, we have found that, which is not exactly the same that has been identified before, but why? And yeah, I am very also skeptical about your measure of this proxy of this connection between regulation and air pollution, because you are using this. I think this is something controversial between the supervisor and the PhD student. Yeah, so you are using the percentage of population exposed to air pollution as an inverse proxy for regulation. Well, you have to justify that, because if you are using that, it means that with countries or inside a country with the same regulation, you have the same levels of pollution, which is not true, because you have a lot of heterogeneity in this sense. So, obviously we all know that to get this kind of proxies is very difficult. We have no data, but I think that this is not a good one. Alternatives, I don't know. If you use this because there is no other reasonable alternative, then okay, try to justify, try to explain why, try to provide, I don't know, some check. Because if not, the reader is not really convinced that you are proxying regulation by this way. Well, some typos. Well, as I said before, 81 references, so this is not a review. So I may suggest reducing this list, mainly by reducing dumping. So just you don't need. Let's say if you are saying something, you don't need 15 or 10 references to support your statement. With 2 or 3 will be enough. Whether this also about the period, whether stopping in 2018 you are capturing or not, or the increasing awareness about environmental issues, just to say something about that. Also you are excluding scope 3 emissions, so you may explore some imputation technique in order not to do that, or at least to check that. And also the endogeneity, just laying variables on period, I think is not sufficient. So you may try something more sophisticated, like, I don't know, instrumental variables, or just providing additional insight in this sense, because this is not enough, and I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the comments. I guess you will send me later the presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe just one thing about the measure of air pollution. I got this comment already in another workshop where I presented the paper, and now I'm exploring to use the Environmental Policy Stringency Index from the OECD instead of air pollution as a better measure of regulation. And then there was one more thing. The reason that to exclude scope 3 emissions is that scope 3 emissions, one thing is that they're very scarcely documented for the firms, and the other thing is that other papers have shown that even when they're reported, they're not necessarily correct. That's why they're normally excluded in this type of investigations. Besides that, thank you very much for the comments, and I will consider them.
Nasir.
I think it would be interesting to explore a little bit the role of industries, no? Like maybe some industries are more polluting than others, and some may be more concentrated in some countries than others, and I suppose it could be interesting to look at interactions. So, for example, an interaction of how industry pollution intensity is interacted with the regulation is affecting firms differently. So an interaction is a little bit more exogenous than purely the level of some variable, and still interesting, right? Because the effects may be coming relatively more in industries that are the impact of regulation may be coming. The impact of the regulation is relatively stronger on industries that are more pollution intensive. And so I think that's maybe this is for a different topic or a paper or whatever. But like I think it's sort of pursuing in your agenda related questions that I think are interesting to explore. I thought the paper was very cool.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm controlling for sector effects, but I'm using the GIGS sectors, so
Right.
I don't know, maybe we can speak later about showing you what ideas you have.
Sure.
Some more questions? Okay, thank you. So the next speaker is Kelly Daraujo. She's talking about innovation ecosystems in Catalonia, exploring geographical high technology firms clustering through localization patterns.
Online. Innovation ecosystems in Catalonia, exploring geographical high technology firms clustering through location patterns. And this is the first chapter of the thesis. I'm working on the title, so for now is Innovation Ecosystems in Europe. And my name is Kelly Rocha, and I'm supervised by Professor Dr. José Maria Araújo Caroto. The motivation of my work first is about Catalonia, because Catalonia has a strategic importance in Spain, with Barcelona as a central innovation hub. It's a leading high-tech region of all Spain. And understanding its firm locations dynamics, we can have critical insights for promoting sustainable and competitive regional development. And besides that, we have the most significant growth in the number of tech hubs recently in Spain, and we had an economic value of 2.5 billion euros and more than 26,000 jobs, with an increase expected for the next 3 years. So this study aligns with the need for evidence-based policymaking in regional economics, so it can guide interventions. So count the time. So it can guide interventions to reduce spatial inequalities and enhance the economic potential of high technology firms. We are talking about high technology firms and how to improve their development. And while previous research has explored special spillovers or industry-specific dynamics separately, we have few studies that have combined these perspectives. So we want to assess their interplay in determining these firm locations across high-tech and non-high-tech sectors. Besides that, we have, by identifying determinants of firm location and the role of special spillovers, this paper aims to provide actionable recommendations for fostering innovation clusters, supporting regional economic growth, and addressing structural imbalances. And the methodology is with special econometrics and comp data models. We want to contribute to methodological advancements to study firm location determinants, offering a framework for other regions. I start from two hypotheses. The first one is about agglomeration economies. We have this hypothesis based on the large-sized firms maintain a dominant role, and new firms are collocated with the existing anchor. And the growth of firms is greater when they are close to each other. And the other one is based on Barcelona, because the concentration of innovative activities is concentrated in and around Barcelona for the major industrialization process and industrial structure based on high-tech services, and it has the major European hub. So the objectives of the paper, first, the primary objective is to investigate the geographical determinants of firm locations patterns in Catalonia, focusing on the role of special spillovers and sector-specific characteristics with a distinction between high-tech and non-high-tech industries. And the secondary is to investigate the location determinants of high-tech manufacturing and knowledge-intensive services, and both with the comparison with non-high-tech knowledge firms, focusing on regional factors as population density, income, unemployment, distance to capitals, and large establishments, with the special spillovers effects and sector-specific clustering patterns, including the role of anchor firms in agglomeration economies, of course. The contributions of the paper are identify geographical spillovers of high technology firms clusters, recognize the determinants that drive the clustering of these firms, highlighting their concentration patterns and contributing to a more comprehensive understanding of regional economic dynamics, and to highlight the benefits of strengthening local economies, reducing regional disparities, promoting competitiveness, achieving sustainability goals. And I think it's the biggest one is to contribute to a broader discourse surrounding the geospatial distribution and concentrations of high technology firms, ultimately focusing advancement in regional economic development strategies and fostering innovation within Catalonia. The literature review connects all these themes. So agglomeration economies, connecting, I read a lot of authors that are connecting agglomeration economies with innovation ecosystems, and innovation ecosystems to high technology firms clusters. So a lot of definitions about agglomeration economies, but I want to focus on this because Duranto and Puga are talking about the mechanisms of agglomeration economies, putting this highlight on these three mechanisms is sharing, matching, and learning. It's a characteristic of innovation ecosystems. So this is, I think, the most connected point. And from this we have the high technology firms clusters, where we have these innovation ecosystems working. So to focus on my research, we have this methodology and data. The database is SABI, and I'm working with data at a 3-digit density level to target specific industries, and my examination location factors for entries during this period, 2010 and 2019. The study area are the municipalities of Catalonia at a municipal level. The classification is high technology firms by sector approach, and I'm working with comp data panel model. This is the sector approach of high technology firms. We have high technology manufacturing and knowledge intense services. These are the codes that we are working with. And for getting these results, I will work with the explanatory variables, from entries, income per inhabitant, distance from capital, the large establishments, unemployment rate, population density, and establishment density. The first results that I got, we have these results. So we have a summary of this is high-tech firms account for a consistent but small percentage of total firm entries in Catalonia, with knowledge-intense services here dominating high-tech entries. The data reveals a sharp decline in overall entries after 2018, reflecting broader economic trends, but high-tech firms maintain steady entry rates, highlighting their resilience and importance to the regional economy. The second one, we are talking about the specific industries. So first, the high-tech manufacturing, and high-tech firms here are concentrated in urban and economically vibrant areas, particularly around Barcelona, confirming the region's role as a center hub for innovation. And the clustering patterns emphasize the importance of urban centers in fostering high-tech growth through agglomeration economies and access to skilled labor and infrastructure. Here we have the same for knowledge-intense services. So here, income per inhabitant, population density, and proximity to provincial capitals emerge as key determinants. Here we have this of high technology intensive service firm entries, highlighting the influence of regional economic and special factors. Special spillovers, particularly those related to income and unemployment, here, play a significant role in shaping location decisions, reinforcing the interconnected nature of regional ecosystems. So here, an overall estimation of special legs from the total. First, high-tech manufacturing firms are more sensitive to proximity factors. Here, the distance from capital to provincial capitals, whereas knowledge-intensive services are driven by income and population density, and non-high-tech firms demonstrate distinct preferences, favoring less urbanized and cost-effective regions, which suggests different locational strategies across sectors. These sector-specific finds provide valuable insights for crafting target policies that support diverse economic activities. Here for the high-tech manufacturing. So the analysis highlights that high-tech manufacturing firms in Catalonia clusters in urban areas with high population density, here, income levels and proximity to provincial capitals. This cluster is influenced by special spillover such as income and labor market conditions in neighboring areas. Non-high-tech firms, au contraire, tend to locate in less urbanized regions, reflecting distinct locational strategies. So, these finds underscore the interconnected nature of regional ecosystems and the critical role of urban centers in fostering high technology, innovation, and economic activity. And the last one is about the special legs from the high technology services. The study emphasizes the importance of tailored policy interventions to foster innovation, clusters, and balanced economic development. Through this understanding, we can work with sector-specific and regional determinants. Policymakers can craft strategies to enhance competitiveness, reduce disparities, and promote more sustainable growth in Catalonia. The role of venture firms that I talked about in the hypothesis and collaboration across municipalities emerges as pivotal in leveraging special synergies, ensuring that the innovation ecosystems thrives and contributes significantly to regional and national development. For this, we have the first preliminary conclusions. So this study highlights that high-tech firms in Catalonia tend to cluster in urban areas with high population density, income levels, and proximity to provincial capitals, while non-high-tech firms are more likely to locate in less urbanized regions, and special spillovers such as income and labor market conditions in neighboring areas significantly influence firm location decisions, particularly for high-tech sectors. And these findings underscore the importance of fostering innovation clusters, supporting regional synergies, and promoting balanced economic development through target policies. And these insights provide valuable guidance for policymakers to improve competitiveness and the innovation ecosystems. The limitations of the work are first, this study is firm-level data from SABI, from this period. It may exclude informal or unregistered business with possible key regional dynamics that we could find. This study is focused on Catalonia, offering a detailed case study, but the finds may not be directly applicable to regions with different contexts and situations. The dataset covers a specific period of time and may not capture long-term trends or the effects of recent global events like COVID or technological advancements after 2019. The special dependence assumptions is talking about special X variables to address spillovers, but depends on specific special weight matrices that may influence results and vary with alternative specifications. Besides that, this study differentiates between high-tech manufacturing, knowledge-intensive service, and non-high-tech firms, but does not explore industry-specific dynamics, limiting granular insights into location patterns. And this analysis identifies correlations between regional factors and firm interests, but does not establish causality with potential endogeneity in variables like income and firm clustering. This study focuses on economic and special factors, but does not analyze potential influences such as environmental sustainability, social dynamics, or political stability. And the final one is to provide policy recommendations but not address the practical challenges of implementation or potential unintended consequences across diverse municipalities. Future research could explore informal and these unregistered firms that I mentioned before. We can do comparative studies across regions. I intend to do that in the future. Investigate longer-term trends and impact of recent global events, like I said before. Future studies could test additional special weights matrices and explore the sensitivity of the results to alternative definitions of special relationships. And industry-specific analysis conduct finer analysis with specific industries or subsectors and could get more detailed insights in these dynamics. Using advanced econometrics techniques to address causality and endogeneity would enhance the robustness of findings and clarify variable relationships. And we can expand this analysis to include environmental, social, and political factors to provide a more holistic perspective on firm locations determinants. And the final is examine the practical implementations of policy recommendations and assessing their real-world impact on regional development. We could fulfill this gap between theory and practice. Thank you so much.
Please, now the discussion is going by Mercedes Teruel. Thank you.
potential persistent trend that there can be. So I locate my company because there are others that they are already located there, and this generates a certain dynamics inside the territory. That would be another comment. And there is also one point that it is the role of the public policies that are as a factor to facilitate the generation of these new companies. So in particular, whether companies such as I don't know, for instance, the fact that there is some business incubators here in Reus, whether they are also facilitating the generation of these high-tech companies. I am just thinking of Reus, for instance. So I think that this is also a factor to have in mind, that they can affect to the generation of these high-tech companies. A particular comment, it is about a variable that it is described in your article, which is spatial distribution. According with the article, it is defined as a dynamic variable that represents the correlation characteristics of the spatial distribution analysis. I don't understand it. Whether it is a dummy variable which is capturing the correlation characteristics. I was a little bit confused when I was reading this, because I think that it is a key question measuring this spatial distribution. I think that mostly always you can extend your analysis, taking into account whether there are differences between the generation of large, medium-sized companies and smaller companies, because perhaps their capacity to locate in and the incidence of the factors, they can be different. So this could be an extension also. And that's all. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Professor, and I will take into account your comments. They are really great, and I know your specialty is innovation, so I have to enjoy your experience on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions in the audience? Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Tori.
Thank you. Now we have finished with